Imagine a military campaign that spent $5.82 billion in its first 100 hours. Imagine that same campaign fired thousands of precision munitions, struck 13,000 targets, and destroyed 85% of the adversary's drone industrial base. Now imagine that after all of that, after the president declared the enemy decimated and the defense secretary pronounced it combat ineffective for years to come, 70% of that adversary's missile stockpile remains. 70% of its mobile launchers still roll. 30 of 33 coastal missile sites along the world's most critical oil choke point are back online. Not in theory, not on paper. In classified U.S. intelligence assessments dated May 2026, this isn't about whether Operation Epic Fury succeeded tactically. It did. This is about a question the Pentagon doesn't want asked. What happens when destruction outpaces depletion? When the cost to degrade the enemy exceeds the cost to rebuild, and the rebuild happens faster than the next strike cycle? Two stories are being told about the same war. One is public, one is classified, and they contradict each other in ways that redefine what winning means. Story 1 comes from the podium. On March 9th, 10 days into the war, President Trump told CBS News that Iran's missiles were down to a scatter, and the country had nothing left in a military sense. On April 8th, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth declared that Operation Epic Fury had decimated Iran's military and rendered it combat ineffective for years to come. CENTCOM Commander General Kurilla testified before the Senate that roughly 90% of Iran's defense industrial base was destroyed. Even the raw materials were targeted. That testimony was later corrected, from destroyed to damaged or destroyed. But the correction came after the narrative had already been set. Story 2 comes from the intelligence community, and it tells a different war. Classified assessments from early May, reported by the New York Times on May 12th, show Iran has regained access to roughly 90% of its underground missile storage and launch facilities nationwide. Those facilities are now assessed as partially or fully operational. Iran still fields approximately 70% of its mobile launchers across the country. It has retained roughly 70% of its pre-war missile stockpile, encompassing both ballistic missiles capable of targeting regional nations and shorter-range cruise missiles for land and sea strikes. And most critically, 30 of the 33 missile sites Iran maintains along the Strait of Hormuz, the waterway carrying 1/5 of the world's daily oil consumption, are back online. Only 3 remain totally inaccessible. The gap between those two stories isn't spin, it's physics. Underground facilities built under 60 meters of reinforced mountain granite absorb strike damage that destroys surface infrastructure but leaves the subterranean production chambers intact. Iran spent decades hardening its strategic industrial base against exactly this kind of campaign. The US struck what was visible, Iran preserved what wasn't. This is where DIB Dispatch lives, the attrition calculus. Let me show you why the numbers matter and how they reveal a structural problem nobody in the Pentagon is willing to name. The United States expended an estimated $5.82 billion in munitions during the first 100 hours of Operation Epic Fury. That figure includes Tomahawk cruise missiles at roughly $2 million per round, SM-6 interceptors at $3.9 to $4.3 million per round, JASSM long-range missiles, Patriot interceptors, and ATACMS ground-based missiles. According to multiple estimates, the Iran campaign consumed roughly 27% of U.S. Tomahawk stockpiles, approximately 36% of JASSM long-range missile inventories, nearly 1/3 of SM-6 missiles, and close to half of the Army's THAAD interceptor inventory. Those aren't abstract percentages. They represent months or years of industrial production that cannot be replaced quickly. Lockheed Martin delivered 620 PAC-3 MSE interceptors in all of 2025. RTX surged SM-6 production to 500 rounds annually, a 400% increase over pre-2023 rates, but that surge required $2.6 billion in capital expenditure and a new solid rocket motor production partnership with Nammo in Perry, Florida. The industrial base to replenish what Epic Fury expended is real, but it is slow, months to years for full stockpile recovery. Now look at the other side. Iran's reconstitution cost is measured in a different currency, not dollars per interceptor, but throughput per month from dispersed, sanctions-resilient manufacturing cells that were never fully destroyed in the first place. But here's what adversaries are scrambling to counter, and what the intelligence community is leaking because the Pentagon won't say it publicly. Iran's drone program is far more difficult to degrade for long periods than its ballistic missile program. The Washington Institute's analysis published just yesterday confirms this. Drones rely on less complex, more easily produced systems. Piston engines, fiberglass airframes, COTS electronics, compared to ballistic missiles, which require huge facilities with extremely specialized equipment like planetary mixers for solid fuel. When CENTCOM said 2/3 of Iran's drone production facilities were damaged or destroyed, that was accurate. What wasn't said is that Iran's drone ecosystem spans the entire country. Universities running defense-oriented research on engines, actuators, and guidance software. Front companies and dual-use suppliers feeding components. Nominally civilian workshops filling gaps in composite materials and assembly. You can destroy a final assembly building with a tomahawk. You cannot destroy the distributed knowledge network that rebuilt it 3 weeks later using different suppliers in a different city. Iran adapted during the war itself. Iran and its proxies launched approximately 4,400 one-way attack drones prior to the April 7th ceasefire, averaging 120 per day. When US and Israeli strikes degraded large-scale launch infrastructure, Iran didn't stop. It shifted. From large, visible salvos to smaller, repeating waves launched from concealed positions, tunnel complexes, civilian industrial terrain, natural geographic features. Smaller waves, but more persistent, more costly to defend against. Because each wave still forces the defender to make the same expenditure decision. Fire a $4 million interceptor at a $20,000 drone, or let it through and risk a strategic hit. The ISW's May 21st special report confirms Iran is using the ceasefire period to reconstitute its drone and missile program. The People's Republic of China has sent missile components. Russia is providing support through the same four-way center exchange architecture, Russia, Iran, China, North Korea, that powers the Alabuga production zone. There is no evidence those components reached Iran yet, but the supply chain is being reactivated while negotiations continue. This isn't reconstruction, it's regeneration, and it operates on a timeline the US industrial base cannot match. 30 of 33 missile sites along the Strait of Hormuz are back online. That number transforms 70% from a statistical artifact into a strategic reality. The Strait of Hormuz carries roughly 21 million barrels of oil per day, 1/5 of global consumption. Every tanker transiting that passage moves within engagement range of Iranian coastal batteries that are, by US intelligence assessment, partially or fully operational. The US Navy now maintains a near-continuous presence of more than 20 warships enforcing the blockade against Iran. Each of those ships carries a finite magazine. Each interception decision is an expenditure decision. The math that defined Operation Epic Fury's first 100 hours, $5.82 billion in munitions cost, now operates in a sustained patrol environment where the adversary's reconstitution rate may exceed the defender's replenishment rate. Iranian officials have coalesced around a demand to formalize Iranian control over Strait of Hormuz transit. That demand, a territorial claim on the sovereign passage of another country, is not a negotiation position. It is a war outcome assessment. Iranian officials believe they won because they survived long enough to still control the threat geometry around the world's most critical oil choke point. The Pentagon declared them combat ineffective. The Strait of Hormuz declares otherwise. This isn't about whether the strikes worked, it's about what they cost, and whether that cost is sustainable in a world where the adversary rebuilds faster than the defender replenishes. The Iran campaign didn't just expend munitions, it revealed the structural vulnerability of the US precision munitions industrial base. Tomahawk stockpiles depleted by approximately 27%, JASSM inventories drawn down by 36%, SM-6 missiles consumed at rates that, according to senior Navy officials, could exhaust current stockpiles in months if the conflict resumed. THAAD inventories reduced by close to 40%. Patriot PAC-3 MSE interceptors, the backbone of Gulf State air defense, running at production rates of 620 per year against expenditure rates that far exceed delivery capacity. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, testified to a House Appropriations Subcommittee. "We have sufficient munitions for what we're tasked to do right now." That statement is technically accurate. It is also temporally conditional. Right now means under the current ceasefire posture. It does not address what happens if full-scale hostilities resume against an adversary that still fields 70% of its missile stockpile and is actively reconstituting with Chinese and Russian component support. European allies have purchased billions of dollars of US munitions for Ukraine. They are now concerned those munitions will not be delivered because the US military needs them to replenish its own stocks. That concern intensifies with every day the Iran ceasefire holds without a resolution, because every day of hold is a day Iran regenerates capability while the US replenishment pipeline runs at industrial speeds measured in years, not weeks. The Pentagon says 90% destroyed. The CIA says 70% remains. This isn't a disagreement about data. It's a disagreement about what destroyed means when industrial reconstitution operates faster than bombardment cycles. When the cost to degrade the enemy's capability in one strike cycle exceeds the cost for the enemy to regenerate that capability before the next cycle, you aren't winning an attrition war. You're participating in one. And attrition wars are won by the side that can sustain production longer, not by the side that can destroy more in a single sortie. The Shahed 136 costs $20,000. The SM-6 costs $4.3 million. That's a 215-to-1 cost exchange ratio. But the deeper ratio is this. Iran's distributed, sanctions-resilient manufacturing ecosystem regenerates drones at an estimated 5,500 units per month from the Alabuga zone alone, while RTX produces 500 SM-6 rounds per year after a $2.6 billion capital expenditure surge. When regeneration rate exceeds replenishment rate, the attrition calculus collapses, and it collapses against the side spending more, not the side building cheaper. Industrial capacity isn't a statistic, it's a weapon. And right now, the weapon that matters most isn't the SM-6. It's the production line that runs 24/7. The most expensive military campaign the United States has conducted in the Middle East in a generation didn't fail. It succeeded at what it was designed to do: tactical degradation on a massive scale. But it revealed something the procurement system wasn't built to handle: that tactical destruction without industrial sustainability is a cost, not a victory. That the adversary's rebuild timeline can outpace the defender's replenishment timeline. That 70% remaining after $5.82 billion expended isn't a margin of error, it's a structural warning. If you were the CENTCOM commander, would you resume full-scale strikes against an Iran that still has 70% of its missile stockpile, knowing each strike cycle depletes US munitions faster than the industrial base can replace them? Or would you accept the ceasefire and let Iran reconstitute while you rebuild your own magazine depth? Type strikes or sustain in the comments. There's no right answer, and that tension is exactly what the attrition calculus demands. This is DIB Dispatch, where billion-dollar projects meet battlefield reality.